"We don't tolerate thieves in the sky, kid," Officer Holtz barked, tightening the handcuffs until 16-year-old Maya gasped in pain. Beatrice Vanderhoven, the wealthy socialite who demanded the seat, watched with a cruel smirk as Maya was yanked from the pod like a criminal. To them, Maya was just a hoodie-wearing fraud who didn't belong. But Holtz was making a fatal career-ending mistake. He didn't know that the thug he was assaulting was Maya Sterling, the daughter of the airline's founder. And the phone vibrating in her pocket wasn't asking for help. It was the CEO himself ordering the tower to lock the runway and trap Holtz in a cage of his own making. The polished floors of JFK International Airport reflected the frenetic energy of the holiday rush. Travelers blurred into a stream of rolling luggage and anxious glances at departure boards. Yet, amidst the chaos, 16-year-old Maya Sterling moved with a calm, deliberate pace that seemed unnatural for a teenager traveling alone. She adjusted her noise-canceling headphones, pulling the hood of her oversized charcoal gray hoodie further over her head. She wasn't trying to hide. She just wanted peace. It had been a grueling week at a boarding school in Switzerland, and she was finally heading home to Los Angeles for the winter break. In her hand, she clutched a boarding pass that bore the distinct gold lining of the Prestige class, the highest tier of luxury available on Horizon Air. When she reached the gate for Flight 402, the gate agent, a harried woman named Brenda, paused. She looked at the scuffed sneakers Mia wore, then at the golden ticket, and finally up at Mia's face. "Honey, you might be in the wrong line," Brenda said, her voice dripping with that distinct blend of customer service politeness and condescension. "Economy boarding starts in 20 minutes. This is for first class and diamond members only." Maya didn't flinch. She was used to this. "I know," she said softly, her voice steady. "I'm in seat 1A. Brenda frowned, taking the ticket with a skeptical pinch of her fingers. She scanned it, expecting the computer to blare an error or reject the code. Instead, the machine gave a cheerful ding, and the screen flashed green. Priority boarding accepted. Brenda blinked, her mouth opening slightly. She looked back at Maya, searching for an explanation that made sense to her worldview. "All right," she muttered, handing the ticket back without eye contact. "Enjoy the flight." Maya walked down the jet bridge, feeling the eyes of the people in the economy queue burning into her back. She could hear the whispers. "How does a kid get up there? Probably a rapper's kid. Or she stole it." She tuned them out, stepping onto the aircraft, the first-class cabin of the Horizon. Air Boeing 787 was a sanctuary of soft leather ambient lighting and the scent of expensive champagne. There were only 8 seats in the prestige section, each a private pod designed for ultimate comfort. Maya found one, tossed her battered backpack into the overhead bin, and sank into the seat. She pulled a book from her bag, a beat-up copy of The Great Gatsby, and curled her legs up, making herself small. Moments later, the piece was shattered. "Excuse me." The voice was sharp, nasal, and demanding. Maya looked up to see a woman standing in the aisle. She was dressed in a Chanel suit that looked like it cost more than most cars, clutching a Louis Vuitton handbag as if it were a shield. This was Beatrice Vanderhoven, a socialite whose name appeared in tabloids more for her public tantrums than her charity work. Behind her stood a man who looked like a coiled spring. He was broad-shouldered, with a military-style haircut, and eyes that scanned the room for threats or targets. He wore a leather jacket, but the bulge of a firearm on his hip and the badge clipped to his belt identified him immediately. Officer Derek Holtz. He wasn't on duty, but men like Holtz never really clocked out. He was working private security for Mrs. Vanderhoven for this trip, acting as her personal buffer against the world. "Can I help you?" Maya asked politely. "You're in my seat," Beatrice snapped, waving her boarding pass. "I specifically requested the bulkhead 1A. That's my seat." Maya glanced at her own ticket, which was resting on the armrest. "I'm sorry, Mom, but my ticket says 1A. Maybe there's a mistake with the booking system," Beatrice scoffed, turning to Holtz. "Derek, handle this. I am not sitting in the second row. I need the leg room for my condition." Her condition seemed to be a chronic case of entitlement. Officer Holtz stepped forward, his boots heavy on the plush carpet. He loomed over Maya, invading her personal space intentionally. It was an intimidation tactic he had perfected over 15 years on the force. "Let me see that ticket," Holtz commanded, not asked. Maya hesitated, sensing the aggression radiating off him, but she handed it over. Holtz snatched it, looking it over with a theatrical scowl. He held it up to the light, then looked down at Maya with a sneer. "This is a reprint," he lied smoothly. "Where's the original?" "That is the original," Maya said, her heart beginning to beat faster. "I printed it at the kiosk 10 minutes ago." "Don't lie to me, kid," Holtz growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous octave. "I've seen this scam 100 times. You buy a cheap economy ticket, Photoshop a first-class pass, and hope the gate agent is too busy to notice." "Well, I noticed. I didn't steal anything," Maya said, her voice rising slightly. "My father bought this ticket." Beatrice laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, I'm sure he did, probably with a stolen credit card." "Derek, get her out of here. I want to sit down and have my gin and tonic before we take off." Holtz leaned in his face, inches from Myers. "You heard the lady. Grab your trash and move to the back of the bus where you belong. Or better yet, get off the plane. We don't need criminals on this flight." Maya stared at him, her fear turning into a cold, hard resolve. She knew who her father was. She knew the power that name held, but she also knew her father had raised her to be respectful, to never pull rank unless absolutely necessary. "I'm not moving," Ma stated clearly. "I paid for the seat. If there is a dispute, call the flight attendant." Holtz's face turned a shade of crimson. He wasn't used to being told no, especially not by a teenager in a hoodie. He reached out and grabbed Mayer's upper arm, his fingers digging into her bicep hard enough to bruise. "Listen to me, you little punk," Holtz hissed. "I am a sworn officer of the law. You are failing to comply with a lawful order. Now get up, or I will drag you out of here in cuffs." The physical contact changed everything. The moment Holtz's hand clamped onto Mia's arm, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted from awkward tension to palpable danger. "Let go of me," Maya yelped, wincing in pain. She tried to pull her arm back, but Holtz's grip was like iron. "Resisting!" Holtz shouted loud enough for the passengers boarding in the economy section to hear. He was setting the stage, creating a narrative where he was the hero subduing a threat. "Stop resisting. I'm not resisting. You're hurting me," Maya cried out. A flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, rushed over from the galley, her face pale. Sir, please let go of her. What is going on?" Holtz flashed his badge with his free hand, thrusting it towards Sarah's face. "Officer Derek Holtz, NYPD. This passenger is trespassing and refusing to comply. I suspect she's utilizing fraudulent documents and is potentially dangerous." Sarah looked at Maya, a terrified 16-year-old girl, pinned to her seat, and then back at the hulking man. "Dangerous, sir. She's a minor. Please let go of her arm. We can sort this out." "There's nothing to sort out," Beatrice Vanderhoven interjected, smoothing her skirt, as if the violence happening 2 feet away was merely a mild inconvenience. "She stole my seat. She's obviously a delinquent. Just get her off so we can leave. We're already 5 minutes behind schedule." "I did not steal this seat." Maya's voice cracked, tears welling in her eyes, despite her best efforts to stay strong. "Check the manifest. Just check the computer." Sarah moved to the console on the wall, her fingers flying over the touchscreen. "I'm checking right now. Just everyone stay calm." Holtz didn't wait. He yanked Maya upward. The force of the pull tore the sleeve of her hoodie and sent her headphones clattering to the floor. "I'm done waiting. You're coming with me." He hauled her out of the pod and into the aisle. Maya stumbled, her sneaker catching on the carpet. She nearly fell, but Holtz held her up by her arm, wrenching it behind her back in a painful compliance hold. "You have no right," Maya gasped, the pain in her shoulder blinding. "You're making a mistake. The only mistake was letting you on this plane." Hall spat. He reached for the handcuffs on his belt. With a metallic click, he secured Mia's wrists behind her back. The economy passengers were now filing past, watching the scene with wide eyes. Some pulled out their phones, recording the incident. "Hey, take it easy on her," a man in a business suit from seat 2B called out. He stood up, looking furious. "She's just a kid, man. What are you doing?" "Sit down, sir," Holtz barked, pointing a finger at the man. Unless you want to be arrested for obstruction of justice, you will sit down and shut your mouth. This is a police matter." The businessman hesitated, looking at Holtz's badge and the gun on his hip, and slowly sank back into his seat, though he kept his phone raised, recording every second. Sarah, the flight attendant, returned from the console, her face ashen. "Officer, wait the manifest. It says Maya Sterling is assigned to 1A. Mrs. Vanderhoven is in 1B. There was a seat swap request, but it was never confirmed for 1A. Holtz froze for a microcond, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. He had already cuffed the girl. He had already made a scene. If he backed down now, he looked like a fool. He had to double down. "The system is wrong," Holtz declared, dismissing the data. "She probably hacked it. These kids can do anything with a smartphone these days. Look at her. Does she look like she belongs in a $5,000 seat? She's a street kid." He shoved Maya forward, forcing her to walk toward the exit door of the plane. "We're taking this to the jet bridge. I'm calling airport police to take custody." Maya stumbled forward, her head down, humiliation burning her cheeks, hotter than the tears. But as they reached the front galley near the cockpit door, she stopped. She planted her feet and looked up at Holtz. "My phone," she said quietly. "What?" Holtz frowned. "My phone is in my pocket. I have a right to make a call even if I'm under arrest. You can make a call from the station cell," Holtz sneered. "If you take me off this plane without letting me make a call," Maya said, her voice trembling but oddly powerful, "you will lose more than just your job. I promise you that." Beatrice laughed from behind them. "Oh, listen to her threaten you, Derek. How cute. She thinks she has leverage." Holtz rolled his eyes. He reached into her hoodie pocket and fished out her sleek black iPhone. He held it up. "Fine. Make your call. Let your gang know you won't be home for dinner. Speakerphone, I want to hear what kind of thugs you associate with." He unlocked it. She had no passcode, a sign of her innocence he ignored and held it to her face. Maya didn't scroll through contacts. She tapped a widget on the home screen labeled simply, "Dad Priority." It rang once. "Maya." The voice on the other end was deep, warm, and clear. "You're boarding. I'm tracking the flight. Looks like you're on time." "Dad!" Mia choked out the dam, finally breaking. "Dad, help me." The voice on the other end changed instantly. The warmth evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp alertness. "Maya? What's wrong? Where are you?" "I'm on the plane." She sobbed. "A man, a cop. He handcuffed me. He's hurting me. He says I stole the seat. He's taking me off." Handcuffed. The word was spoken with a terrifying calm. "Who is he?" "Put him on." Holtz smirked. He thought he was dealing with some deadbeat dad who would yell and threaten. He loved putting guys like that in their place. He pulled the phone away from Maya and brought it to his own mouth. "Yeah, this is Officer Derek Holtz," he announced, puffing his chest out. "Your daughter is in custody for fraud, theft of services, and resisting arrest. She's being removed from the aircraft. You can pick her up at the Port Authority holding cell in Queens." There was a silence on the other end of the line. It lasted for 3 long seconds. When the voice returned, it wasn't shouting. It was a voice of absolute, crushing authority. "Officer Holtz, my name is Robert Sterling. I suggest you look at the tail number of the plane you are standing on." Holtz frowned. "What?" "The tail number," Robert Sterling repeated. "It ends in RS. Do you know why?" Holtz blinked. "I don't care about the tail number." "You should," Robert said. "Because I own it. I own the plane. I own the airline Horizon Air. And right now, I am looking at a live feed of the cockpit data. I am going to make one phone call, Officer Holtz, and that plane is going nowhere, and neither are you." Holtz laughed. He actually laughed. "Yeah, sure, buddy, and I'm the King of England. Nice try." He hung up the phone. He looked at Mia with a smug grin. "Your daddy is a good storyteller. Runs in the family." "You shouldn't have done that," Maya whispered, looking at the phone in his hand. "Move." Holtz shoved her again. Suddenly the intercom dinged, but it wasn't the usual pre-flight announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came over the speakers, sounding strained and urgent. "This is Captain Anderson. I have just received a Level 1 ground stop order from corporate headquarters. All passengers are to remain in their seats. Security is sealing the jet bridge. Nobody gets on, and nobody gets off. The engines, which had been winding up, began to spool down with a whining groan. The lights in the cabin flickered and went to full bright. Holtz froze. He looked at the speaker, then down at the girl in handcuffs. For the first time, a sliver of doubt pierced his arrogance. Maya looked up at him, her eyes dry now. "I told you," she said. He grounded the plane. The silence following Captain Anderson's announcement was heavier than the roar of the engines had been. The ambient lighting in the first-class cabin seemed to turn clinical, exposing the sweat beading on Officer Derek Holtz's forehead. He was still gripping Mir's cuffed arm, but his grip had loosened slightly, not out of mercy, but out of confusion. The plane hadn't just stopped taxiing. The entire aircraft had powered down its main systems. The air conditioning vents went silent, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing and the murmurs of passengers behind the curtain. "What is this?" Beatrice Vanderhoven screeched, breaking the spell. She looked around frantically, clutching her pearls. "Why are the lights flickering?" "Derek, tell them to turn the plane back on. I have a gala in Los Angeles tonight." Holtz ignored her. He was staring at the cockpit door. It swung open with a forceful thud. Captain Anderson stepped out. He was a man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and 4 gold stripes on his epaulets that usually commanded absolute authority on his vessel. He wasn't wearing his hat. He looked ready for a fight. He ignored the passengers and walked straight up to Holtz. Officer Anderson said, his voice low and dangerous, "Uncuff the passenger." Holtz straightened up, his training kicking in. He tried to physically intimidate the captain, puffing out his chest. "I don't take orders from bus drivers, Captain. This individual is in custody for federal offenses, fraud, trespassing, and resisting arrest. I am removing her from the aircraft." "You aren't removing anyone," Anderson replied, stepping into Holtz's personal space. "You don't seem to understand the situation. You are currently trespassing on private property owned by Horizon Air. And the man you just hung up on, the man whose daughter you have in handcuffs, is Robert Sterling, the founder and CEO of this airline." Beatrix let out a sharp gasp. Sterling, as in the Sterling Group. Her face went pale. She looked at the teenage girl in the hoodie, searching for any sign of the immense wealth associated with that name. She saw only the scuffed sneakers and the messy hair. "That's impossible," she muttered. "Look at her. She's lying. She is not lying." Anderson snapped at Beatrice without looking at her. He kept his eyes locked on Holtz. "Mr. Sterling has issued a code red on this flight. That means this plane is now a crime scene, but not for her." "For you," Holtz sneered, though his confidence was fracturing. "I'm a cop. I don't commit crimes. I stop them. If her daddy is rich, good for him. He can bail her out. But right now, she's coming with me." Holtz yanked Mir again, trying to force his way past the captain. "Move, or I'll charge you with obstruction." "I wouldn't do that," a voice called out from the economy section. It was the businessman in seat 2B again. He was standing in the aisle, his phone held high, the red recording light blinking steadily. "I've got 5,000 people watching this live on Instagram right now, officer. You just yanked a minor who hasn't resisted once. You refused to look at the manifest. And now you're threatening a pilot. Put that phone away," Holtz roared, reaching for his taser. "Don't you dare," Captain Anderson shouted, blocking Holtz's arm. "You deploy a weapon on my aircraft, and I will have the federal air marshals drop you before you hit the floor. Do you understand me?" The tension was razor thin. Maya stood between them, her shoulders slumped, the metal cuffs biting into her wrists. She looked up at Captain Anderson. "Captain," she whispered, "please just let him take me off. I don't want anyone to get hurt." Anderson looked at her, his expression softening into profound pity. "No, Miss Sterling. You aren't going anywhere with this man. Your father made that very clear. Security is already sealing the exits. We are waiting for his team." "His team?" Hall scoffed. "Who does he think he is, Batman?" At that moment, the plane's satellite phone on the wall buzzed. Sarah, the flight attendant, picked it up with shaking hands. She listened for a moment, her eyes widening, then held it out. "Officer Holtz," she said, her voice trembling. "It's for you. It's the chief of police for the Port Authority." Holtz froze. He looked at the phone like it was a bomb. He snatched it from Sarah, Holtz speaking. The voice on the other end was loud enough that even Mayer could hear the screaming. "Holtz, what in God's name are you doing on Flight 4002? Chief, I apprehended a suspect for shut up. I don't want to hear it. I just got a call from the mayor, the police commissioner, and the governor within the last 3 minutes. Do you know who Robert Sterling is? He just threatened to pull Horizon's entire hub out of JFK if his daughter isn't released immediately. He's talking about billions in revenue, Holtz. Billions. Chief, she's a fraudster. She has a fake ticket." Holtz argued, desperate to salvage the narrative. "The ticket is real, you. We checked the logs. She is who she says she is. You are currently holding the daughter of the biggest donor to the Police Benevolent Association in handcuffs. Uncuff her, stand down, and pray to God you still have a pension when this is over." The line went dead. Holtz slowly lowered the phone. The blood had drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and gray. He looked at Maya, then at the cuffs. Well, Captain Anderson crossed his arms. Holtz's ego, however, was a stubborn beast. To uncuff her now was to admit total defeat in front of a live audience. He gritted his teeth. I need to verify this myself. I'm not releasing a suspect based on a phone call. I'm taking her to the jet bridge." He was stalling, looking for an exit strategy that let him keep his dignity. He pushed Mia forward again. "Let's go." "You are making a grave mistake," Anderson warned. "Watch me," Holtz spat. He pushed Mia through the open cockpit door area and onto the jet bridge. The cool air of the terminal hit them, but as they stepped onto the metal walkway, they found their path blocked. It wasn't just airport security. Standing at the end of the jet bridge, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights, were 4 men in immaculate black suits. They didn't look like police. They looked like sharks in human clothing. The 4 men standing at the end of the jet bridge formed a wall of expensive wool and silk. In the center stood a man who radiated a terrifying kind of calm. He was older, perhaps 60, with silver hair slicked back and rimless glasses that magnified his icy blue eyes. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and a tablet in the other. This was Gordon Banks, the chief legal officer for the Sterling Group. He was a man who didn't go to court. He walked into rooms, and people settled just to avoid his wrath. Behind him stood 2 massive bodyguards and a uniformed Port Authority sergeant who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. Holtz stopped, holding Mirror in front of him like a human shield. "Step aside. Police business." Gordon Banks didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He simply tapped his tablet and looked up. "Officer Derek Holtz, badge number 4922. 3 excessive force complaints in the last 4 years, all dismissed due to lack of evidence. Currently moonlighting as private security for Mrs. Beatrix Vanderhoven without properly filing your off-duty work permit, Form 10 Alpha, with the department." Holtz's jaw dropped. How did you—" "I know everything," Mr. Holtz Banks said smoothly, taking a step forward. "I know your mortgage payments are overdue. I know you're going through a messy divorce. And I know that as of 30 seconds ago, your provisional employment with the NYPD has been suspended pending an internal affairs investigation." "You can't do that," Holtz shouted, his grip on Mirror tightening nervously. "It's already done," Banks said. He gestured to the Port Authority sergeant. "Sergeant Miller, if you would." Sergeant Miller stepped forward, looking apologetic. Derek let her go. "It's over. The chief pulled your status. You're technically a civilian right now, and if you don't let her go, it's kidnapping." Holtz looked around wildly. The walls were closing in. He looked down at Maya, who was trembling. For the first time, he saw her not as a suspect, but as a trap he had walked right into. With trembling fingers, Holtz reached for his key. Click, the cuffs sprang open. Mia rubbed her wrists, gasping, as the blood rushed back into her hands. Banks moved instantly, closing the distance with surprising speed. He gently placed a hand on Mia's shoulder, positioning himself between her and Holtz. "Are you injured?" Miss Sterling, Banks asked, his voice suddenly gentle. My wrist hurts," Mia stammered, "and my shoulder." Banks turned back to Holtz, his face hardening into stone. "Assault on a minor, unlawful imprisonment, civil rights violations, and will add emotional distress. He looked at the sergeant. "Arrest him." What Holtz yelled as Sergeant Miller grabbed his arms. "You can't arrest me. I was doing my job." She looked suspicious. "Looking suspicious is not a crime, Derek." Miller muttered, spinning Holtz around and slapping a fresh pair of handcuffs, Holtz's own cuffs, onto his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent." As Holtz was dragged away, shouting obscenities, Beatrice Vanderhoven emerged from the plane holding her drink. She had been watching from the doorway. She saw her bodyguard being arrested and marched away. She looked at Banks, then at Mir, and let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. Well, that was dramatic. Honestly, the help these days is so incompetent. I suppose I'll have to find a new security guard. She looked at Ma with a fake, tight smile. "No hard feelings, dear. You know how it is. One can never be too careful." She turned to go back to her seat, expecting the world to reset to her convenience. Mrs. Vanderhoven, Banks called out. "I wouldn't get comfortable." Beatrice stopped and turned. "Excuse me." Banks checked his tablet again. "Beatrice Vanderhoven, wife of Charles Vanderhoven, CEO of Vanderhoven Logistics. Is that correct?" "Yes," Beatrice said, puffing up. "And my husband is a very powerful man. He does business with everyone." "He does." Banks agreed. In fact, 60% of his company's revenue comes from a shipping contract with Horizon Air Cargo. Or I should say it did. Beatrice froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Robert Sterling just terminated the contract, effective immediately." Banks tapped the screen. "The email was sent 2 minutes ago. Your husband is currently trying to reach you. He seems quite distressed." Beatrice's phone, buried in her Chanel bag, began to ring. Then it stopped. Then it rang again. You can't do that," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling. "That contract, that's the whole company. That's our liquidity. Clause 4, Section B," Banks recited from memory. "Horizon Air reserves the right to terminate the agreement if any representative of the vendor engages in conduct that damages the reputation or safety of Horizon Air or its principals. Harassing the CEO's daughter and inciting a false arrest qualifies." Banks gestured to the terminal. "You have been placed on the federal no-fly list for interfering with a flight crew, Mrs. Vanderhoven. You are barred from Horizon Air and all its partners. You need to gather your things and exit the aircraft. Sergeant Miller will escort you out." "No-fly list," Beatrice gasped. "But how will I get to Los Angeles?" "I believe the Greyhound bus leaves from the Port Authority terminal in Manhattan in 3 hours," Banks said coldly. "It's very economical." Beatrice looked at her phone, which was ringing incessantly. She looked at the first-class seat she had fought so hard for. Then she looked at Maya, the girl in the hoodie she had called trash. I didn't know." Beatrice stammered, tears of panic welling up. "Please tell your father I didn't know." Maya rubbed her bruised wrist. She looked at the woman who had watched her get manhandled with a gin and tonic in her hand. "You didn't care," Mia said softly. "That's worse." Beatrice was led away, sobbing, her humiliation complete. Banks turned to Maya. "Your father is on a video link in the private lounge. He wants to see you immediately, and the paramedics are on their way to document your injuries." "I just want to go home," Maya said, her voice small. "We know," Banks said, "but first, we have to finish this. The world is watching." He pointed to the passengers in the terminal window, all pressing their phones against the glass. The story wasn't just local anymore. It was global, and Robert Sterling was about to go to war. The internet moves faster than any aircraft. By the time Mir was safely ensconced in the Horizon Air VIP Diamond Suite, a hidden lounge behind the main concourse, accessible only via biometric scan. The video of her arrest had already garnered 4 million views on Twitter and was trending #1 globally on TikTok under the hashtag #Flight4002. The businessman in seat 2B, whose name turned out to be Marcus Thorne, a tech influencer with a modest following, had unwittingly become the most important journalist in the world for the last hour. His caption was simple but incendiary. "Copper's unaccompanied minor in first class. Pilot and lawyer shut it down. Turns out her dad owns the airline. Watch the karma instantly hit." Inside the suite, the atmosphere was hushed. Maya sat on a velvet sofa, an ice pack pressed to her shoulder. Her hoodie was torn, her hair messy, and her face starry with dried tears. But she was safe. Gordon Banks stood by the window speaking in low, rapid-fire tones into his phone, coordinating the PR nuclear strike that was about to unfold. The door to the suite burst open. It wasn't security. It was Robert Sterling. He didn't look like the polished CEO seen on the covers of Forbes. He was wearing a casual polo and slacks, having sprinted from his office to his helicopter the moment he received Mia's call. He looked frantic, a father first and a billionaire second. Maya. He crossed the room in 2 strides, dropping to his knees in front of the sofa. He pulled her into a hug that was fierce and desperate. Maya buried her face in his shoulder, finally letting go of the brave facade she had maintained for the last hour. She wept, her body shaking against him. "I'm sorry, Dad," she sobbed. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Robert pulled back, holding her face in his hands, his eyes blazing with a mixture of immense love and terrifying rage. "You apologize for nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing. You did everything right." He looked at her bruised wrist, his jaw tightening so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. "He hurt you." "I'm okay," Maya sniffled. Gordon stopped him. Robert stood up, turning to Banks. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the cold, hard steel of a titan of industry. "Gordon status. Holtz is in Port Authority custody. At the precinct," Banks reported, tapping his tablet. "Charges are filed. Assault battery, unlawful imprisonment, child endangerment. The DA is already on the phone. They want to make an example of him. The video is damning. There's no ambiguity." And the woman Robert asked, his voice dropping to a subterranean growl. "Vanderhoven. Currently in the terminal," Banks said, with a rare grim smile. She was escorted off the plane. "She's trying to book a flight on another airline, but the no-fly flag propagated through the DHS system instantly. She's stranded." "Good," Robert said, "but not enough." "Destroy them, Gordon. I want Holtz to never wear a badge again. I want him to never work security at a mall kiosk again. And Vanderhoven. I want her husband to feel the pain of every bruise on my daughter's arm. Execute the contract clauses. Call the board of his company. Tell them if Charles Vanderhoven remains CEO by tomorrow morning, Horizon Air and all our subsidiaries will blacklist every partner they have." "It's already in motion," Banks assured him. Outside in the main terminal, the reality of Robert Sterling's wrath was hitting Beatrix Vanderhoven like a physical blow. She stood at the ticket counter for Delta Airlines, her face blotchy from crying, her Chanel suit rumpled. A line of angry travelers stood behind her as she argued with the agent. "What do you mean, declined?" Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking. "It's a black AMX. It has no limit." "I'm sorry, Mom," the agent said, looking at her screen with a mix of pity and annoyance that the card isn't just declined. The issuer has flagged it as stolen or compromised per the account holder's request. You need to call your bank. My husband Beatrix's hands shook as she fumbled for her phone. She dialed Charles. He picked up on the first ring. He didn't say hello. "You stupid, arrogant woman." Charles Vanderhoven's voice was a hiss of pure vitriol. "Charles, they took my seat. They arrested Derek. And now my cards aren't working," Beatrix wailed. "You have to fix this. Fix this." Charles laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Do you know what you just did? You just cost me the Horizon contract. That's $300 million a year. Beatrice, $300 million. And 5 minutes ago, the board called an emergency meeting to vote on my removal because stock is tanking. They're saying I'm a liability because my wife is a racist shrew who attacks children." "I didn't know she was his daughter," Beatrice pleaded. "It shouldn't matter who she was," Charles roared. "I'm freezing the accounts. I'm canceling the cards. I'm not letting you drain what's left of my fortune while I fight to stay out of bankruptcy. Don't come home to the Hamptons. I'm having the locks changed." The line went dead. Beatrice lowered the phone slowly. The people in line were staring. Someone held up a phone recording her. She was alone in New York, with no money, no flight, and no home to go back to. She sank to the dirty linoleum floor of the terminal, covering her face, as the flashes of camera phones went off around her like lightning. 6 months had passed since the incident on Flight 402, But the world had not forgotten. The courthouse in Queens was besieged by media vans. What had started as a viral video had turned into a landmark case about police overreach and the entitlement of the elite. Inside courtroom 4B, the air was stale and tense. Former officer Derek Holtz sat at the defendant's table. He looked nothing like the arrogant bully who had stormed the first-ass cabin. He had lost 20 pounds. His cheap suit hung loosely on his frame. His skin was shallow, the result of months spent in protective custody. Cops who get arrested for assaulting kids don't fare well in general population. His union had abandoned him on day 2. His GoFundMe page had been taken down for violating terms of service regarding hate speech. He was represented by a public defender who looked exhausted before the trial even began. On the other side of the aisle sat the prosecution team, bolstered by a special victims consultant hired by the Sterling family, a former federal prosecutor named Eleanor Vance, no relation to the earlier mentioned names, to avoid who was known in legal circles as the Shark. The gallery was packed. In the front row sat Robert Sterling, looking stoic. Next to him was Maya. She looked different now, older, wiser. She wore a simple navy blazer and slacks. She wasn't hiding in a hoodie anymore. She sat with her head high, staring straight at the back of Holtz's head. The trial had lasted 3 weeks. Holtz's defense had been weak. He tried to claim he was following protocol, that he feared for his safety, that Mia had been verbally aggressive. But then the prosecution played the video, not just the video from seat 2B. They played the cabin security footage, which Horizon Air had upgraded and provided in 4K resolution. The jury watched in silence as Holtz twisted the arm of a 16-year-old girl who was sitting quietly reading The Great Gatsby. They watched him sneer. They watched him ignore the flight attendant. Now it was time for the verdict. All rise, the Bayef Eind. Judge Harrison, a stern woman with no patience for theatrics, entered the courtroom. She took her seat and looked at the jury box as the jury reached a verdict. "We have your honor," the foreman said. Standing up, Holtz closed his eyes. He was praying for a miracle. Maybe a hung jury, maybe a mistrial. "In the matter of the people versus Derek Holtz," the foreman read, "on the count of assault in the 2nd degree, we find the defendant guilty." A murmur went through the crowd. Holtz flinched. "On the count of unlawful imprisonment in the 1st degree, guilty. On the count of endangering the welfare of a child, guilty. On the count of official misconduct, guilty." It was a clean sweep. Guilty on all counts. Judge Harrison looked at Holtz. "Mr. Holtz, you abused the badge that so many good men and women die to protect. You used your authority to terrorize a child because you felt she didn't belong in your world. You let your prejudice dictate your actions." She shuffled her papers. "Sentencing is usually scheduled for a later date, but given the overwhelming evidence and the mandatory minimums associated with these felonies, I am prepared to rule now. Do you have anything to say?" Holtz stood up, his legs shaking. I was just doing my job," he mumbled, still unable to take responsibility. "I thought she was a criminal. And that," Judge Harrison said, taking off her glasses, "is exactly why you belong in prison. Because when you look at a young black girl in a nice seat, you don't see a passenger, you see a suspect." She banged her gavel. "I sentence you to 10 years in state prison with no eligibility for parole for the first 7 years. Remand to custody immediately." The sound of the gavel was like a gunshot. The bailiffs moved in handcuffing Holtz. This time, the cuffs were on him for good. He looked back at the gallery, his eyes meeting my mirrors. He looked for fear in her eyes, but he found none, only pity. As Holtz was led away, the courtroom doors opened and the crowd began to file out. Outside on the courthouse steps, the press was waiting. But the story wasn't just about Holtz. Standing near the bottom of the steps, looking haggarded and aged 10 years and 6 months, was Beatrice Vanderhoven. She wasn't there to support Holtz. She was there because she had been subpoenaed as a witness, forced to testify to her own entitlement. She was unrecognizable. The Chanel was gone, replaced by a generic department store coat. Her hair was graying at the roots. She saw Robert Sterling and Mir exiting the building, flanked by security. Beatrice hesitated, then stepped forward, pushing through a reporter. "Mr. Sterling," she called out, a voice desperate. "Mr. Sterling, please." Robert stopped. He didn't have to, but he signaled his security to hold back. He looked at Beatrice with the same expression one might look at a rusted piece of machinery. "Mrs. Vanderhoeven," Robert said coolly. "Please." Beatrice begged, tears streaming down her face. "My husband, ex-husband, he took everything. The prenup. I got nothing because of the public disgrace clause. I'm living in a studio apartment in New Jersey. I work at a call center. I can't even fly to see my sister in London because of the ban. Please just lift the ban. Let me have my life back." Robert looked at her. He didn't enjoy her suffering, but he didn't pity it either. It was simply the consequence of her own gravity. "You have a life, Beatrice." Robert said, "It's just a different one now, one where you have to follow the rules like everyone else. Maybe the view from the back of the bus will give you some perspective." He turned to Maya. Ready to go home, Maya looked at Beatrice one last time. "I hope you learn to be kind," Maya said softly. They walked to the waiting black SUV, leaving Beatrice standing on the concrete, surrounded by the flashing lights of the city she used to think she owned. The car door closed, shutting out the noise. "It's over," Maya said, letting out a long breath. "Not quite," Robert said, a gleam in his eye. "We still have one more thing to do. The settlement money Holtz and the police department have to pay you. We need to decide where to send it." Maya smiled for the first time in a long time. "I have an idea." 1 year later, the summer sun beat down on the tarmac of the private airfield in Teterboro, New Jersey. The heat shimmered off the asphalt, but inside the newly constructed glass and steel hangar, the air was cool and filled with the hum of excitement. A massive banner hung from the rafters, the 402 Foundation launch day. Maya Sterling stood at the podium. At 17, she looked years older than the frightened girl in the hoodie, who had been dragged off a plane. She wore a crisp white pilot shirt, with a single stripe on the epaulette, the mark of a student pilot close to certification. The crowd before her was a mix of press aviation executives and, most importantly, 50 teenagers from underprivileged neighborhoods across New York and Los Angeles. They were the first class of the 402 Foundation. A year ago, Maya began, her voice amplified clearly through the speakers. "I was told I didn't belong in a seat I had paid for. I was told I was suspicious because of how I looked and where I came from. I was told to go to the back of the bus." She paused, looking out at the faces of the students' kids who looked just like she did. Kids who had been told no their entire lives. The settlement from the lawsuit against the police department and the personal liability suit against Derek Holtz was $5 million, Mia continued. "My father wanted to put it in a trust for me, but I didn't want money that came from hate. I wanted to turn it into fuel." She gestured to the shiny new training aircraft parked behind her. A fleet of Cessna 172s, each painted with the Horizon Air logo. Every penny of that settlement went into this. Mayor announced the 402 Foundation, a full-ride scholarship program for aspiring pilots who can't afford flight school. "We aren't just giving you seats on a plane. We are teaching you how to fly them, because when you're the pilot, nobody can tell you where to sit." The hangar erupted in applause. Robert Sterling stood in the front row, his eyes shining with pride. He clapped the loudest, watching his daughter turn a moment of trauma into a legacy of power. While Maya celebrated the future, the ghosts of the past were living in a very different reality. 300 meters away in the bleak gray corridors of the upstate correctional facility, inmate 09. 9B, formerly known as Officer Derek Holtz, pushed a mop bucket across the linoleum floor of the mess hall. The job was humiliating, backbreaking, and paid 12 cents an hour. But the work wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the hierarchy. In prison, a former cop, especially one famous for hurting a kid, was at the very bottom of the food chain. He had no badge, no gun, and no friends. He paused to wipe sweat from his brow, glancing up at the television mounted in the corner of the cafeteria. The news was on, and here, is Maya Sterling cutting the ribbon on her new aviation academy, funded entirely by the settlement from the infamous Flight 4002 incident. Holt stared at the screen. He saw Mia smiling radiant and powerful. He saw the gleaming planes. He saw the life he had inadvertently funded with his own destruction. "Hey, keep moving, Holtz!" a guard shouted. "A man 20 years younger than him. You missed a spot. Don't make me write you up." Holtz gritted his teeth, dipped the mop into the gray water, and kept scrubbing. He would be scrubbing for a long, long time. Meanwhile, in a cramped, noisy diner in Queens, a waitress named Bee adjusted her apron. Beatrice Vanderhoven's hands, once manicured and adorned with diamond rings, were now chapped and red from harsh dish soap. Her husband had successfully divorced her, leaving her with nothing but a small stipend that barely covered rent in a basement apartment. Her social circle had evaporated. The charity galas, the first-class flights, the Hampton summers, they were distant memories. "Order up! Table 4 needs ketchup," the line cook yelled. I'm going!" Beatrice muttered, grabbing a bottle. She walked to table 4, where a group of young tourists were looking at her phone. "Did you see this?" one of the girls asked. "That girl who got arrested on the plane. She just got her pilot's license. She looks so cool." "Yeah," her friend replied. "And that lady who yelled at her, the Karen. I heard she lost everything. Good riddance. Imagine being that hateful." Beatrice froze. She placed the ketchup on the table with a trembling hand. The girls looked up at her, not recognizing the haggarded woman in the stained uniform. "Thanks," the girl said dismissively. "Can we get some more water?" "Yes," Beatrice whispered, looking down at her scuffed orthopedic shoes. "Right away." She walked back to the kitchen, the weight of her irrelevance crushing her chest. She had tried to ground a queen, only to find herself buried in the dirt. Back at the airfield, the ceremony was over. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the runway. Maya walked out to the lead aircraft, a twin-engine trainer. Her instructor, a retired Air Force colonel, nodded to her. "You're ready for your final check ride." "Captain Sterling." "I'm ready." Maya smiled. She climbed into the left seat, the pilot in command seat. She put on her headset, the noise-canceling cups, sealing out the world just like her headphones had on that fateful day. But this time, she wasn't hiding. "Tower. This is Sterling 1 ready for departure," she said clearly into the mic. "Sterling 1 Tower. You are cleared for takeoff. Runway 2 left. The sky is yours, Mia." Mia pushed the throttle forward. The engines roared to life, a sound of pure power. The plane surged forward faster and faster until the wheels left the ground. She pulled back on the yoke, and the earth fell away. The terminal, the city, the memory of the handcuffs and the shouting. It all shrank until it was invisible. From the ground, Robert Sterling watched the small plane bank sharply towards the horizon, climbing higher into the clouds. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick email to his legal team. "Transfer the ownership of the new Boeing 787 to the Foundation. Let the kids fly the big ones." Up in the air, Maya leveled off at 5,000 feet. She looked out at the endless expanse of blue. She checked her instruments. She was on course on time, and exactly where she belonged. She was flying first class, and this time, nobody could take her seat. What happened to Maya Sterling on Flight 402 wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a brutal reminder that for some prejudice overrides logic and authority is used as a weapon rather than a shield. Officer Holtz and Beatrice Vanderhoven thought they were dealing with a powerless victim they could bully into submission. They judged Mare by her hoodie and her skin color, never pausing to consider the person beneath. But they forgot the most important rule of power. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits quietly in seat 1. A reading a book. The karma that struck back was swift and total. But the true victory wasn't seeing Holtz in prison or Beatrice in poverty. The true victory was the legacy Maya built from the wreckage of that day, turning a moment of humiliation into a movement that would lift thousands of others into the sky. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold and dreams taking flight, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that karma is real. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. What would you do if you saw someone being unfairly targeted on a plane? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.